I want to give you just a lightning overview of what's going on in the Core Econ textbook, Chapter 3, that explains how rising wage rates in the rich countries resulted in usually falling, well, I think always falling, hours worked. In some countries, the number of hours worked fell faster than others, but we see that trend over time in the countries that escape that Malthusian trap. All right, here we go. Hang on, this is going to be fast. Each part of this story is told in detail in Chapter 3, and I hope you're marching through those panels one by one to see for yourself how each point is made carefully. But this is just the lightning overview. So here goes. The chapter starts, or at least the chapter starts modeling this phenomenon by looking at a production function that hopefully you're very familiar with. And that's just simply a student's hours studied per day, and of course the maximum would be 24. I mean, some models do look at the maximum as being 16 because you got to sleep and eat and do other things. But anyway, this version of the model pretends like you could study for 24 hours. However, the fact of needing sleep and food and all that is illustrated in this function too. Notice that your grade increases, albeit at a decreasing rate, much like the agriculture production function in Chapter 2, up to 15 hours. And then after that, all the additional studying you might do doesn't improve your grade a lot. Anyway, this is a production function, and the output is your final exam mark, and presumably that's the grade in the class. Sometimes you could model it as the grade in the class. All right, from there, so this is what the connection between work hours and outcomes. Then we ask the question, well, how much work, how much free time will this person, Alexei is his name, choose? And for that, the model builds in the ability to examine Alexei's tastes. And we do this through a difference curve. These three curves are three of an infinite number of curves in this free time, which is something that Alexei enjoys, and this the final grade, the higher the better, in Alexei's point of view. Anyway, the relationship between grades and free time, the happiness gets higher as we move to the northeast, as we move up and away from the origin. Having 24 hours of free time and getting a grade of 100 is what all students dream of. They just want the grades for paying the tuition. Sometimes, I mean, obviously you all want to learn and are hungry for knowledge, but I've seen students in the past where they just want the credential regardless of whether it means any actual learning. They want to be able to do something other than study economics and still get an A in the course. Anyway, the mechanism that we use to study people's tastes is these indifference curves, all the combination of grades and free time that make Alexei equally happy, indifference curves. Again, this indifference curve illustrates a better level of happiness than this indifference curve. This indifference curve is still better. So now we have a way to think about what Alexei would prefer. If we're moving along one indifference curve, the movement of A to E, if we're at that level of happiness, we see that Alexei would give up 9 points on his final grade if he could attain one more free hour every day of the semester. So that's Alexei's taste over free times and grades at this level of happiness. There'd be some other similar evaluation at different levels of happiness. So that's how we bring Alexei's preferences into the model. Then the model does something sort of interesting. It maps the trade-off between two goods. Here we get to the feasible set. What combination of final exam marks and hours of free time are within Alexei's grasp? He only has 24 hours in the day, and his ability to convert study time into grades has a particular quality that we mapped in that production function. That depends on how alert and well-fed and the quality of food that he chooses, as well as his previous coursework and native intelligence, etc. Anyway, the innovation here is that we count, if he just played all day, the grasshopper, instead of the ant, he'd be here, where he'd have 24 hours of free time a day and a final grade of 0. But as he moves, because the nature of this production function, as he gives up free time to pursue final exam marks, he has less and less free time, but he has better and better marks. So his study effort is his free time is equal to 24 minus however many hours he studies. So at this point here, he's got 19 hours of free time. That means he's studying 5 hours a day, and he's attaining marks of about 57. And you can go back to that production function and see that on the production function, that information is mapped as 5 hours of study time and an outcome of 57 on his final grade score. I'll leave you to do that on your own. But this converts that information about the production function and the number of hours in a day into a depiction of all the combination of grades and free time that Alexei can achieve. And we assume that he'd be on this frontier because being inside at a point like D, he could have more free time and better grades both, and he'd want to be out here. A and E dominate D, in other words. B, he'd love to be at B, but that's out of his range, right? He just, that amount of study effort can't bring him to a grade that high, given his other characteristics. And now we combine the information on the feasible set with the information on tastes and preferences. That's tastes or preferences are the same, and we see that this indifference curve number 3 is as high a satisfaction level as Alexei can attain, given the nature of his tastes and given the feasible set. So the best he can do is achieve at E. If he's ever at D, he'll notice that, hey, I'm able to enjoy a lot more free time and have to give up less grades for that choice to play instead of studying. I have to, my feasible set requires me to give up fewer grade points than I'm actually willing to attain this level of free time. So that's, if he were ever at A, a similar, man, I can improve my grade by studying more very rapidly, more rapidly than I would need to do to motivate more study effort. The needing to do to motivate more study effort comes from my taste. That's this function. This transformation, really, marginal rate of transformation is the slope of the feasible set. The marginal rate of substitution is the slope of the indifference curve. The marginal rate of substitution tells you what you're willing to give up in order to get a better grade or to have more free time. The marginal rate of transformation tells you what you have to give up given your technology, essentially. All right, so that's how we think of how a rational person chooses a point like E. That's the model. And then from there, the model goes on to say, hey, let's look at something else. We can look at another type of trade-off in between hours of free time. That's something that people like, free time, and again, it maxes out at 24 hours in the day. But what about if it's just somebody's work effort? So they get paid some wage rate based on their occupational choice and their work effort and whatever other qualities enable them to convince an employer to hire them at some particular wage. We imagine that you have some flexibility instead of having to work 8 hours a day because that's the terms of the job. We imagine you could get a job where you worked 5 hours a day or 20 hours a day, that you have that flexibility. Of course, in the real world you don't, but we're imagining, actually you do when you choose an occupation. You can choose to be a management consultant who are notoriously hard workers, highly paid, but they work 60, 80 hours a week regularly. Or you can choose to be an elementary school teacher. You bust your butt during the school year, but then you have 3 months unpaid, but also of free time. Free time you can raise your kids or who are out of school during that time, whatever. But these are choices we can make, you can make at your stage in life where you're choosing occupations. Anyway, we imagine that each worker has that ability, and over time, with worker bargaining for terms, pay, and hours, that evolves slowly in society. Anyway, here the hours of free time are traded against overall levels of consumption, and 1 hour of work gets you that wage rate for that hour, and the second hour work gets you that wage rate again. So we have just a straight line feasible set between leisure, free time, and consumption. And by the same logic, we have preferences over material well-being and having free time, ability to buy goods and services, and ability to enjoy free time to use whatever goods and services we have. That trade-off is again captured by these indifference curves, and again, in this model too, the rational consumer ends up at a point like A. And this person is working 6 hours a day, and that's doing the best they can. So within this model, we ask the question, what happens when wages go up? And remember, this is the story of all those countries that escaped the Malthusian trap. Their incomes went up really fast. And we see that on the one hand, when your wage rate goes up, it's more expensive to take another hour off. So the increasing wage rate could mean that, hey, geez, it's my time is money. I got to work harder, because whereas before at $10 an hour, if I took an hour off, I'd give up $10. Now that I'm paid more, I have to give up $20 for that same hour. But on the other hand, you like free time as well as other goods, and when you're making $20 an hour, you might think, hey, I can satisfy my material needs working only 10 hours a day instead of 15 if I'm a management consultant. So maybe I'll be hired away and go work for industry directly. Still a long work day, 10 hours a day, but not the crazy hours that I was working as a management consultant. Here we depict a case where the person's wage rate increased. Because of these competing effects, we could end up having more leisure with that increase in wage rate, or we could have the same amount of work and more of the consumption good, or we could have more work and more consumption. That's the case here. But realize that depending on the nature of this person's preferences, the increase in wage rate could end up seeing more free time consumed, less free time consumed because that higher trade-off. That's the substitution effect. The income effect would cause you to have more of everything you like, including free time. Anyway, those are the possibilities. Here we see the person's work effort went from 6 hours a day to 7 hours a day with that change. And then we take this model saying, well, what did people actually do? And this panel, we go back to the first section of this chapter, where you see for the U.S. work effort, at annual hours worked on average, and GDP per capita is a proxy for average income. We saw that it fell fairly steeply and then flattened out for the last almost 100 years. Whereas in France, it fell steeply and then jumped up a little bit and then fell steadily. And the Netherlands looks more like France and like the U.S., just this steady fall. So that's 3 countries' experience, and that suggests that as these countries achieve takeoff, people choose more leisure time, less work time as they get richer. And that's a rational choice.